the liberation of Israel and the parting of the Red Sea. There was a time when God's people lived in the shadows of slavery. 400 long years passed under the scorching sun of Egypt, where men bent their backs under the weight of mud bricks, where women cradled their children to the sound of cracking whips, where hope seemed a distant, almost forgotten memory. But God does not forget. He hears the cry of the oppressed. And when the appointed time came, He raised up a liberator. This is the story of Moses and the greatest miracle of liberation ever witnessed by humanity. Egypt was a land of extreme contrasts. On one side, the majestic palaces of Pharaoh stood imposingly on the banks of the Nile River, with their gigantic columns decorated with golden hieroglyphs, their spacious halls, where the cool breeze circulated between curtains of fine linen, their gardens perfumed with lotus flowers that floated in tanks of crystal-clear water. Pharaoh, the god-man of the Egyptians, lived surrounded by unparalleled luxury, served by hundreds of slaves who bowed before his presence. On the other side, in the work fields that stretched across the fertile Nile Valley, the Hebrews suffered. In the brickyards, the heat was unbearable. The brick kilns burned day and night, filling the air with thick, acrid smoke. Men with sun-bronzed skin, calloused and wounded hands, mixed clay with straw, molding bricks under the constant watch of Egyptian overseers wielding braided leather whips. The crack of these whips echoed through the fields like thunderclaps of cruelty. The women also worked. They carried water in heavy clay jars from the river to the construction sites, climbing steep ramps under a sun that seemed to burn their very souls. Their simple dresses of coarse linen were soaked with sweat. Their children grew up breathing dust and seeing their parents humiliated daily. At night, in the modest adobe dwellings, exhausted families gathered. Their homes were simple: mud brick walls, low roofs made of straw and reeds, and dirt floors. A small, flickering oil lamp illuminated faces marked by suffering. There, the elders told stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They spoke of ancient promises, of a land flowing with milk and honey, of a God who had not forgotten them. But the years dragged on. Generations were born and died in slavery. And hope, like a flame without oil, began to fade. It was then that God appeared to Moses in a burning bush in the desert of Midian. The desert was a vast ocean of golden sand and reddish stones, where the silence was broken only by the wind whistling between the rocky ravines. There, far from the oppression of Egypt, Moses had become a shepherd, accustomed to the solitude of the arid mountains, to the immense, starry sky of the desert nights. When God called him to liberate Israel, Moses hesitated. But no argument can prevail against the divine call. God sent him back to Egypt with his brother Aaron, and there, before Pharaoh's golden throne, amidst the gigantic columns adorned with images of Egyptian gods, Moses declared, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go." Pharaoh, seated on his high throne, with his golden scepter and his double crown representing Upper and Lower Egypt, looked at those two Hebrews with disdain. "Who is the Lord that I should obey his voice? I do not know the Lord, nor will I let Israel go." Then the plagues began. The majestic Nile, worshipped as a god by the Egyptians, turned to blood. Its waters, normally blue and crystal clear, became red and thick, like coagulated blood. The smell of dead fish filled the air throughout Egypt. Frogs invaded homes, even Pharaoh's private chambers. Lice covered men and animals. Flies formed black clouds that obscured the sun. Egyptian cattle died in the fields, their swollen bodies rotting in the heat. Painful ulcers broke out on the skin of the Egyptians. Hailstones as large as fists fell from the sky with such violence that they shattered trees and killed everything in the fields. Countless locusts covered the land like a living, devouring carpet, until nothing green remained in all of Egypt. Dense, palpable darkness covered the land for 3 days, a darkness so deep that the Egyptians could not see their own hands in front of their faces. And finally, the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn. On that terrible night, a groan rose from all the land of Egypt. There was no house where there was not someone dead. From Pharaoh's palace to the simplest dwellings, the lament was universal. It was on that very night that Israel departed. But what a night it was! In the homes of the Hebrews, there was a feverish, urgent activity. Entire families moved hurriedly by the light of lamps and torches. Women tied clothes into bundles, filled water skins, and sacks with flour. Men gathered their sheep and goats, tied loads to donkeys. Children, frightened by the haste of the adults and the distant sound of Egyptian lamentations, clung to their mothers' garments. "Quick, there's no time." The words ran from house to house. They ate standing up, hurriedly, unleavened bread because there was no time to wait for the dough to rise, hastily roasted meat, bitter herbs that reminded them of the years of suffering. Their loins were girded, their sandals on their feet, their staffs in their hands. They were ready to leave, and when Moses gave the signal, they set out. It was not a small group. The Bible records about 600,000 men, in addition to women and children. Imagine the scene, a crowd of perhaps 2 million people with their flocks, their children, their elderly, moving through the night. The sound was impressive, the bleating of sheep, the lowing of cattle, the braying of donkeys, the crying of babies, the dragging of bare feet on the sand, the clinking of pots and tools, voices calling to one another in the darkness. They left behind the potteries where they had toiled. They left the fields where their ancestors had been buried. They left 400 years of history, a history of pain, but their own history. And they walked toward the unknown. But they were not alone. God went before them in a visible, unmistakable way. During the day, a pillar of cloud. It wasn't an ordinary cloud, one of those you see floating across the sky. It was a vertical, dense column, rising from the earth to the heavens, white as snow, majestic, imposing. It moved ahead of the people, showing them the way. And when it stopped, the people camped. At night, that same column transformed into fire. Imagine the spectacle, a column of dancing flames, red and gold, illuminating the desert with a supernatural glow. Its light was enough to illuminate the entire camp. Children watched in wonder. Old men murmured in reverence. Never in the entire history of humanity had God manifested himself so visibly, so constantly. He was not just a God who revealed himself at special moments. He was there 24 hours a day, guiding, protecting, manifesting his presence. Meanwhile, in the royal palace in Memphis or Tanis, Pharaoh faced reality. His halls, once filled with pomp and power, now echoed with silence and mourning. His own son, the crown prince, lay dead. But Pharaoh was the lord of Egypt, the God-man. And God-men cannot show weakness. Days passed, and then fury replaced grief. "What have we done?" he roared to his advisors. "We let Israel go, and we lost our servants." The Egyptian nobles, also furious at the loss of their slaves, incited Pharaoh. Egypt's economy depended on those slaves. Who would now build the great works? Who would work in the fields? Pharaoh gave immediate orders. In the royal stables, soldiers prepared 600 chosen war chariots, the best in Egypt. These chariots were fearsome war machines, light, fast, made of curved wood and leather, with 6-spoked wheels reinforced with bronze, pulled by trainable Arabian horses, the fastest and most resilient animals in the ancient world. Each chariot carried 2 men, a driver and a soldier armed with bow, arrows, and spears. But it wasn't just 600 chariots. Pharaoh gathered his entire army, thousands of infantry soldiers with spears, shields, and curved swords. Archers with composite bows capable of firing arrows at great distances. Officers in golden chariots, distinguished by their plumes and insignia. War trumpets sounded throughout Egypt. Pharaoh's wounded pride had become a machine of destruction. Meanwhile, the Israelites had arrived at a place called Pi-Hahiroth, near Baal-Zephon, facing the sea. It was a peculiar geographical position. On one side was the Red Sea, or more precisely, the Sea of Reeds, a stretch of water that extended as far as the eye could see. Its waters were a deep blue, almost black in some places. Waves broke gently on the beach of golden, sand mixed with pebbles. The smell of salt and seaweed filled the air. On the other side, rocky mountains rose up narrow gorges, terrain impossible to traverse with a crowd of that size, especially with herds, children, and the elderly. They were, geographically speaking, in a trap. The camp was immense. Simple tents of coarse fabric stretched for miles. Campfires dotted the landscape like earthly stars. The sound was of a city in motion, women grinding grain, men mending sandals, children playing in the sand, herds grazing on the sparse vegetation, elderly people sitting on rugs talking about the extraordinary events they were witnessing. The column of cloud had stopped. It was time to rest. And then someone shouted, "Look, behind you!" On the desert horizon, a cloud of dust began to form. First small, then growing, widening, approaching with terrifying speed. And then, emerging from that cloud of golden sand, they appeared, the war chariots of Egypt. The sun reflected off the bronze of their wheels, the metal tips of their spears, and the soldiers' armor. The sound came soon after, the thud of thousands of hooves hitting the ground, the creaking of wooden wheels, the soldiers' war cries, the shrill sound of military trumpets. Panic erupted in the Israelite camp like wildfire in dry grass. Women screamed. Men ran to their families. Children cried desperately. Chaos ensued. "We're going to die. We're all going to die." They surrounded Moses in great tumult. Their voices were a mixture of terror, anger, and despair. "Were there no graves in Egypt that you brought us out of there to die in the desert? Why have you done this to us, bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we tell you this in Egypt? Leave us alone so that we may serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert." Fear is capable of making the human heart forget miracles. Those people had seen the 10 plagues. They had seen the power of God humble Egypt. They had been spared destruction when the angel of death passed over their homes. They had seen the pillar of cloud and fire. But in the face of imminent danger, memory failed. Present terror erased past victories. But Moses was different. He had spoken with God face to face. He had seen the burning bush. He had held the staff that turned into a serpent. He had stretched out his hand over the Nile and seen it turn to blood. He knew the God he was dealing with. Moses stood up. His voice cut through the panic like a sword cuts through the darkness. "Do not be afraid. Stand firm and see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." What an extraordinary declaration. Surrounded by a terrified crowd, with the most powerful army on earth approaching, with the sea before them and mountains on either side, Moses declared victory. But even Moses, in his heart, cried out to God. And God answered him with a surprising question. "Why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground." God was not merely promising deliverance. He was commanding a miracle that would defy all the laws of nature. Before anything else happened, something extraordinary occurred. The angel of God, who was going ahead of the Israelite camp in the pillar of cloud, changed position. The entire pillar, that majestic pillar of white cloud rising to the heavens, began to move. Imagine the people's astonishment at seeing that divine presence glide through the air, circling the camp, heading behind them. The pillar of cloud positioned itself between the Israelite camp and the rapidly approaching Egyptian army. For the Egyptians, it was darkness, a supernatural, dense darkness that completely blinded them. Their horses reared up in fright. Their chariots were forced to stop. The soldiers shouted in confusion in the darkness. Pharaoh, in his golden chariot, cursed furiously but could not advance. It was as if a wall of darkness separated them from Israel. But for Israel on the other side, that same cloud gave light. Its face turned towards the chosen people shone, illuminated, comforted. Throughout that night, the cloud kept the two armies separated. The Egyptians could not approach Israel. And then Moses did what God had commanded. With all the people watching, with 2 million eyes fixed on him, Moses approached the shore. The sound of the waves breaking on the sand was rhythmic, constant, indifferent to human drama. The air smelled of salt and seaweed. The dark water of the sea stretched to the horizon, seemingly insurmountable. Moses raised his staff, that shepherd's staff that God had transformed into an instrument of miracles. He stretched out his hand over the sea, and he opened his mouth in prayer, invoking the name of the Lord. At that moment, God acted. A wind began to blow. It was not a gentle breeze. It was a strong wind coming from the east, a wind that made clothes beat violently against bodies, that lifted sand and threw it against faces, that roared like an enraged lion. It was the breath of God, the breath of the Almighty sweeping the waters. And the waters began to move. First, the waves stopped breaking naturally. Then they began to recede. not like a normal, slow, gradual tide, but as if an invisible force were pushing them, dividing them. The waters on the right began to accumulate, rising, forming a liquid wall. The waters on the left did the same, rising, defying gravity, creating a corridor between them. The wind continued to blow with furious force throughout the night. And as it blew, the seabed began to appear. First damp, muddy, full of algae and shells. But the divine wind continued its work. The ground dried, hardened, becoming solid ground. At dawn, the impossible lay before the eyes of Israel, a path through the middle of the sea. The walls of water on both sides rose like buildings of 10, perhaps 15 stories. Through them, one could see the ocean beyond, distorted, trembling. Fish swam within these liquid walls, trapped in supernatural suspension. Algae swayed vertically. The light of the rising sun pierced the waters, creating an ethereal, magical, impossible blue-green glow. And in the middle of the path, dry land firm enough to walk on, wide enough for multitudes. March. Moses shouted, "March in the name of the Lord." But who would be first? Who would dare to take the first step between those walls of water that defied all natural laws? What if the waters fell while they were in the middle? What if it was an illusion? But that's what faith is, taking the first step when you don't see the whole path. Some courageous men, perhaps Caleb and Joshua among them, took the first step. Then others. And then, like a dam breaking, the whole people began to move. It was a procession like no other. Entire families walking along the ocean floor. Small children looked in wonder at the walls of water, pointing to the fish swimming inside. Some adults reached out trembling hands to touch those liquid walls, but recoiled with reverence. The ground beneath their feet was dry, firm, but there were shells and starfish scattered about, evidence that this was, in fact, the ocean floor. The sound was impressive. 2 million feet walking, sheep bleating, donkeys braying, wagon wheels creaking, children crying, others laughing excitedly, parents calling their families to stay together. And above all this, the continuous roar of those two walls of water, a deep, primal sound, as if the ocean itself were groaning at God's command. The walls of water were not smooth. They undulated, trembled, moved in hypnotic patterns, but did not fall. It was as if invisible hands held them up. The sunlight that streamed through those walls created dancing patterns of blue and green light on the ground, making the whole path seem magical, sacred. Elderly people who never imagined seeing such a thing staggered, leaning on canes, tears streaming down their wrinkled faces. Young people ran ahead, then returned to help their families. Mothers carried babies against their chests, whispering prayers of gratitude. Shepherds guided flocks, amazed by the animals' tranquility in that impossible place. It took hours, perhaps all night, and part of the following morning. 2 million people don't cross quickly, no matter how wide the path. But they crossed, all of them, from the first to the last. None were left behind. When the last Israelite family reached the middle of the sea, something changed on the other side. The dark cloud that blinded the Egyptians began to dissipate. With the light of dawn, Pharaoh and his soldiers could finally see. And what they saw filled them with renewed fury. There was the path through the middle of the sea, and there was Israel walking calmly across the other half of the crossing, almost reaching the other shore. Behind them, Pharaoh roared, "They can't escape. They are our slaves." Pride is a poison that blinds reason. Those men had witnessed the 10 plagues. They had seen their own river turn to blood, their crops destroyed, their children killed. And now they saw a sea divided in two by supernatural power. But wounded pride does not accept defeat. The Egyptian war chariots began to enter the path between the waters. The horses, however, were nervous. They hesitated, reared up, sensing that something was deeply wrong there. But the drivers forced them to move forward. First a few chariots, then dozens, then hundreds. The entire Egyptian army entered the seabed. The sound of their wheels echoed strangely among those walls of water. The bronze of their weapons reflected the greenish light that pierced the suspended ocean. They shouted war cries, confident that they would soon reach those runaway slaves. But they were not alone there. God was watching. The Bible says that, in the morning watch, the Lord looked at the Egyptian army through the pillar of fire and cloud. and God disturbed them. Imagine the scene. Suddenly, without warning, the wheels of the chariots began to come loose. Axles broke. Wheels detached and rolled down the sides of the path, falling onto the edges of those walls of water. Horses stumbled, breaking legs. Chariots collided with each other. Soldiers were thrown to the ground. Panic set in. Those battle-hardened warriors who had conquered nations, who were the terror of the entire ancient world, began to scream in fear. "Let's flee from before Israel," they cried in despair. "For the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians." But it was too late to flee. They were in the middle of the sea, surrounded by walls of water on both sides, their chariots broken, their horses wounded, their path blocked by the very confusion they had created. At that moment, the last Israelites stepped onto dry land on the other side of the sea. The entire nation was saved. They turned and looked back, seeing the Egyptian army trapped in that divine snare. And then God spoke to Moses again, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen." Moses, now on the opposite shore, stretched out his hand once more over the sea. It was dawn. The golden light of a rising sun painted the horizon. And in that light it happened. The walls of water began to tremble, first subtly, then violently. Those enormous masses of ocean, held by supernatural power throughout the night, began to yield to the natural pull of gravity. The Egyptians saw it, and they screamed. They tried to run, but where to? They were surrounded. They tried to turn back, but the path was blocked by broken chariots and fallen horses. Some tried to swim, but they were trapped between the falling masses of water. And then, with a roar that must have been heard for miles, the waters fell. It was as if two liquid mountains collapsed at the same time. The sound was deafening, a roar that silenced any human scream. The waters collided in the middle with explosive force, creating a wave that rose dozens of meters into the air before crashing down again. White foam filled the air. The spray was launched so high that it created a temporary rainbow in the dawn light. Cars were crushed like paper. Horses vanished instantly. Soldiers were swallowed by the turbulent waters. The bronze armor that was supposed to protect them became their deathly weight, dragging them to the depths. Within minutes, it was all over. The sea returned to its normal form, its waves breaking normally on the shore, as if nothing had happened. The dark blue surface showed no sign of the road that had been there. No sign of Pharaoh's 600 chosen chariots. No sign of his mighty army. The Bible records with terrifying simplicity, not one of them remained. On the other side, on dry land, Israel was stunned. 2 million people stood silently, processing what they had just witnessed. Some were on their knees. Others had their arms raised to the heavens. Children clung to their mothers. Old men wept openly. Then, as the sun continued to rise in the sky, illuminating the now calm sea, the waves began to bring evidence of the destruction. Pieces of chariots, Egyptian shields, broken spears, empty armor. The bodies of Egyptian soldiers began to appear on the beach, brought in by the tide. Israel saw and understood. Their oppressors were dead. 400 years of slavery had ended definitively. Egypt, the most fearsome military power in the world, had been destroyed in an instant by the power of God. Reverence gripped everyone. It wasn't just relief or joy. It was a sacred, profound awe. They had witnessed the impossible. They had walked on the ocean floor. They had seen the greatest army in the world swallowed by the waters. And they understood with crystal clarity that the God of their fathers was real, powerful, terrible in his majesty. The Bible says, "And Israel saw the great power that the Lord had exercised against the Egyptians, and the people feared the Lord, and believed in the Lord and in Moses his servant." And then, spontaneously, the song began. Moses was the first to raise his voice, and soon the whole nation joined him. Men, women, children, all sang with all their might, their voices rising like incense to the heavens. "I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. He has hurled into the sea both horse and rider. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him, my father's God, and I will exalt him." The men danced, leaping with joy, arms raised, feet pounding on the sand. The women took tambourines and panderos they had brought from Egypt and began to play joyful rhythms. Miriam, Moses' sister, led the women in a celebratory dance. The Lord is a warrior. The Lord is his name. He has hurled Pharaoh's chariots and his army into the sea. His chosen captains were submerged in the Red Sea. The depths covered them. They sank to the depths like a stone. The song continued, verse after verse of praise, recapping the miracle, exalting God's power, prophesying the journey ahead. It was a moment of pure adoration, unchoreographed, unrehearsed, springing from the deepest part of the human heart that had just been touched by the divine. Your right hand, O Lord, has been glorified in power. Your right hand, O Lord, has shattered the enemy. In the greatness of your majesty, you have overthrown those who rose up against you. You sent your wrath, which consumed them like stubble. Children ran among the adults, laughing, singing fragments of the song they heard. Elderly people who had been born into slavery and never imagined living to see that day sang with tears streaming down their wrinkled faces, their voices trembling but full of fervor. The sun rose higher and higher. The beach was alive with celebration. And for hours, the people of Israel sang, danced, and praised, celebrating not only their physical liberation, but the fact that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob had proven his faithfulness beyond question. On that day, on the shores of the Red Sea, under the bright desert sun, before the waters that had become instruments of salvation and judgment, the people of Israel learned a lesson that would echo through all future generations. There's no sea that God cannot part, no enemy that he cannot defeat, no situation too impossible for his power. The people who had been enslaved for 400 years were now free. Egypt, in a single day, had lost its army and its power. And Israel, even though they had a long journey ahead, 40 years in the desert awaited, now knew who their God was. They had walked through the impossible. They had stepped where no human being should ever step. They had been eyewitnesses to the greatest miracle of liberation in human history. And they would never be the same again. The Red Sea returned to its natural state. Its blue waters broke calmly on the shore. But those waters would forever hold the secret of that extraordinary night when they parted to let God's people pass through and closed to judge their oppressors. And the story of that day would be told and retold throughout the centuries, a story of faith when all seemed lost, of obedience when divine command seemed impossible, of deliverance when there was no visible way out, of a God who fulfills his promises, who hears the cry of the oppressed, who intervenes in human history with unparalleled power. Israel marched into the desert as a free people. And although trials still awaited, although murmuring and rebellion were yet to come, that day would remain etched in the nation's collective memory. The day God parted the sea, the day the impossible became possible, the day slavery ended, and the journey to the promise began. And even today, thousands of years later, the story is told. The story of Moses, of the parting of the Red Sea, and of the God who liberates his people. The plagues of Egypt and the blood of redemption. The scorching sun of the Egyptian desert burned the skin of Hebrew slaves as they carried mud bricks under the relentless whip of overseers. The air was dense, heavy with the smell of sweat, wet clay, and suffering. The pyramids rose to the horizon as monuments to Pharaoh's glory, built with the blood and tears of a people who had no more hope. 400 years. For centuries of captivity. Generations were born and died under the Egyptian yoke, never knowing freedom. Children grew up seeing their parents hunched over, exhausted, aging before their time. Mothers cradled their babies with songs of a God who seemed to have forgotten them. The elders told stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but these narratives seemed like distant legends, echoes of a past that might never return. In the Hebrew villages of Goshen, simple mud brick houses were stacked against each other. Barefoot children ran through the narrow, dusty streets. Women ground grain into stones as they talked in low voices, always alert to Egyptian soldiers patrolling the area. The Nile, that sacred and powerful river, meandered through the black and fertile land, bringing life to the desert, but also reminding the Hebrews that they were in a foreign land. But amid the silence of despair, a cry began to rise. It wasn't loud, but it was deep. It came from the heartbreak of mothers who lost children thrown into the river. It came from the broken men who could no longer bear to carry stones. It came from the elderly who wanted to die free. And this cry went through the heavens and reached the ears of the God of Israel. The Lord has heard. The Lord has seen. The Lord remembered the covenant with Abraham. And God decided to act. The call of Moses. In Pharaoh's palace, with its gigantic pillars decorated with golden hieroglyphics, curtains of fine linen, and polished marble floors, the ruler of Egypt considered himself a living God. His servants bowed to the ground as he passed. His words were law. His power seemed absolute. The walls of the palace were adorned with paintings of victorious battles, Egyptian gods with animal heads, and Pharaoh on his throne, receiving the adoration of all. It was before this throne that Moses presented himself. An 80-year-old man with a gray beard and calloused hands from decades in the desert, holding only a simple shepherd's staff. By his side, his brother Aaron. Behind them, no army, no weapons, no gold. Just a message from the God of Israel. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go. The hall echoed with the laughter of Egyptian courtiers. Pharaoh leaned on his golden throne, his eyes painted with coal, shining with contempt. The massive pillars of the palace seemed to mock the boldness of those two old Hebrews. Who is the Lord that I should hear his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go. Pharaoh's heart was as hard as the stones of his pyramids. And so the confrontation between the true God and the gods of Egypt began. First plague, waters and blood. The next dawn brought a scene that Egypt would never forget. Moses and Aaron met Pharaoh on the bank of the Nile, where he used to perform his morning rituals. The sacred river, worshipped as a god, flowed majestically, its green waters reflecting the sky. Papyrus boats glided smoothly. Fishermen cast their nets. Women filled clay jars. Then Moses lifted up his staff and stretched it out over the waters. What happened next defied all natural logic. The water began to change. First a red spot, then another. Within seconds, the entire river was red as blood. It was not an illusion. It was real blood, dense with the smell of death. The fish began to float, swollen and dead. The stench spread along the banks. The water that gave life to Egypt now brought death. People were running around with their jugs, trying to save the clean water, but it was too late. Even the water stored in houses, in the stone vessels and in the cisterns, had turned to blood. The whole of Egypt was thirsty. Desperate, the Egyptians dug on the banks of the river, looking for drinking water in the earth. But Pharaoh returned to his palace, drinking wine from his private reserves, and hardened his heart still more. Second plague, the invasion of the frogs. 7 days passed with the Nile bloodied. Then one humid morning, the second plague began. First, it was just a few frogs jumping out of the river. Nothing unusual. But then came more, and more, and more. In minutes, there were thousands. In hours, millions. Green, fat frogs leaping everywhere, covering the ground like a living, loathsome carpet. They entered the luxurious palaces and the humblest huts. They invaded the rooms, jumping on Pharaoh's beds of fine linen and on the straw mats of the poor. They entered the ovens where the women baked bread, burning to death, but being replaced by hundreds of others. They fell into the bowls of food, the jugs of water, the stored clothes. There was no escaping the incessant sound of his croaks, day and night. The streets of Egypt were impassable. Each step crushed frogs, leaving a trail of slimy bodies. The sound of croaking was deafening. Children cried, unable to sleep. Adults went crazy with the constant noise and the impossibility of preparing clean food. Pharaoh called Moses. Pray to the Lord to take away the frogs, and I will let the people go. Moses prayed, and the next day, all the frogs died at the same time. But the relief was brief. The smell of millions of dead frogs rotting under the sun was unbearable. The Egyptians gathered them into heaps, huge piles of corpses that reeked of horrors. But when Pharaoh saw that there was relief, he retracted his word. Third plague, lice. Without warning, Aaron stretched out his staff and struck the dust of the ground. And the impossible happened. Every grain of sand, every particle of earth turned into tiny lice, almost invisible but deadly annoying. They covered everything. They infested the hair of the Egyptians, their clothes, their beds. They bit non-stop, causing incessant itching. They attacked men, women, children, animals. Even Pharaoh's priests, ever so spotless in their white robes and shaved heads, were covered in lice, scratching themselves desperately. The magicians of Egypt, men considered powerful and wise, tried to replicate the miracle with their incantations, but failed miserably. For the first time they admitted before Pharaoh, "This is the finger of God." But Pharaoh's heart remained hard as granite. Fourth plague, swarms of flies. The fourth plague brought a clear distinction. God drew an invisible but absolute line between the Egyptians and his people. Clouds of flies, so dense that they darkened the sun, invaded Egyptian homes. They were no ordinary flies, but voracious swarms that sting, biting, and making life impossible. They covered the food, landed on the faces, entered the ears, the mouth, the nose. The buzzing was constant and maddening. But in Goshen, where the Hebrews lived, there was not a single fly. The sky was clear. The children played quietly. Families ate in peace. The distinction was undeniable. The God of Israel was protecting his people. The Egyptians looked with envy at the land of Goshen. How was it possible? The border had no high walls or physical barriers, but flies simply did not cross it. Pharaoh again promised to let the people go, but when the plague ceased, he backtracked once more. Fifth plague, pestilence in animals. The fifth plague has struck at the heart of the Egyptian economy. A violent and fulminating plague fell on the Egyptian cattle. Magnificent horses that pulled the war chariots fell dead. Strong oxen that plowed the fields simply stopped breathing. Sheep, goats, camels, donkeys, all the Egyptian flocks were decimated. In the fields, the smell of animal death was suffocating. Farmers wept in front of their dead herds, representing years of lost work. Egypt's wealth was literally rotting under the sun. But in Goshen, not a single animal of the Hebrews died. His sheep grazed peacefully. His oxen moved healthily. His donkeys carried loads without problem. Pharaoh had it checked. The messengers returned confirming not a single Hebrew animal had died. But Pharaoh's heart remained unyielding. Sixth plague, ulcers. Without warning, Moses took handfuls of ash from the furnace and threw them into the air before Pharaoh. The fine dust rose like a cloud and spread throughout Egypt, invisible but devastating. And then the worst physical plague up to that point began. Festering wounds, painful ulcers, inflamed tumors began to appear on the skin of the Egyptians. It began with an itch, then redness, then blisters that turned into open, purifying, unbearably painful wounds. No one was spared. Rich and poor, young and old, all were covered with wounds. Egyptian priests, who had to be ritualistically pure to serve in their temples, could no longer perform their duties. They couldn't even stand before Moses, groaning in pain. The streets were filled with people suffering, some delirious with fever, others unable to move because of the pain. The Egyptian physicians, with all their wisdom and herbs, had no cure. The smell of infected flesh mingled with the desert heat. But once again, in Goshen, the skin of the Hebrews remained clean and healthy. Seventh plague, hail and fire. God sent a warning through Moses. "Tomorrow I will send the worst storm Egypt has ever seen. Gather your servants and animals inside, or you will die." Some Egyptians, terrified by the previous plagues, obeyed. Others, still mocking, left their servants and animals in the field. The next day, the sky darkened in an unnatural way. Black, heavy clouds formed, charged with electricity. Then it began. Lightning tore through the sky in succession, illuminating everything with blinding white light, followed by thunder so loud that it made the buildings tremble. And from the sky fell stones of ice the size of fists, mixed with fire. It was impossible. Hail and fire, opposite elements, falling together. The hail destroyed everything in the field: wheat, barley, flax, trees. The ice stones pierced leaves, broke branches, killed animals that had been left outside. And the fire, descending in the form of lightning, ran along the ground, burning everything that the hail had not destroyed. Egyptian servants who were in the camp were hit and killed. Centuries-old trees were broken in half. Entire plantations, months of work, turned to rubble in minutes. The storm raged for hours, turning the verdant fields of Egypt into a shattered desert. But in Goshen, not a single hailstone fell. The sky was clear, the crops intact, the children playing quietly as they saw, in the distance, the destruction in Egyptian territory. Pharaoh, terrified, called Moses. "I have sinned. The Lord is just. I and my people are ungodly. Pray that the thunder and hail may cease." Moses prayed. The storm stopped instantly. But when Pharaoh saw that the rain, the hail, and the thunder ceased, he sinned again and hardened his heart. 8th plague, locusts. "If you refuse to let my people go," said Moses, "tomorrow I will bring locusts upon your territory." Pharaoh's counselors, for the first time, had the courage to confront him. "How long will this man be a snare to us? Let the people go. Do you not see that Egypt is ruined?" But Pharaoh, stubborn, refused again. The next day, an east wind blew over the land. It was hot, dry, persistent, and he brought with him something that obscured the sky: locusts. Not tens, not thousands, but billions of them. Living clouds of insects that darken the sun. They descended upon Egypt like an avalanche. The clatter of its wings was deafening. When they landed, they covered everything: houses, streets, fields. And they began to eat. They ate what little was left of the hailstorm. They ate every green leaf, every shoot, every fruit. They ate even the bark of the trees. Within hours, the land that was already devastated was completely bare, brown, dead. The Egyptians stared in horror at their empty fields. Famine was inevitable. Egypt, once the breadbasket of the ancient world, now had nothing to plant. All was lost. Pharaoh, panicked, called Moses in haste. "I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Forgive my sin just this one more time." Moses prayed. A violent westerly wind blew and carried all the locusts into the Red Sea. Not a single one remained. But Pharaoh's heart, inexplicably, hardened once again. 9th plague, darkness. There was no warning this time. Moses simply reached out to heaven, and the light was gone. It was not night. They were not clouds. It was a supernatural, palpable, oppressive darkness. It was as if someone had erased the sun, moon, and stars simultaneously. The Egyptians could not see their own hand in front of their faces. They couldn't see their family members next to them. The darkness was so dense that it seemed to have weight, physical pressure. For 3 days, no one moved from where they were. It was impossible to navigate in absolute darkness. People were paralyzed where they were when the darkness fell. Children cried, clinging to their parents. People screamed in the void, hearing only echoes of their own voices. The terror of the darkness was psychological and spiritual. But in the houses of the Hebrews, there was light. Natural light, warm, comforting. They could see their families, they could work, they could live normally. The difference couldn't be clearer. When the darkness finally dissipated, Pharaoh called out to Moses, furious. "Go, serve the Lord, but leave your flocks here." "No," Moses replied firmly. "Not a single nail will remain. We will take everything." Pharaoh burst into rage. "Get out of my presence. Do not appear before me anymore, because the day you see me, you will die." "As you said," Moses replied calmly, "I will never see your face again." The 10th plague, the death of the firstborn. Then God announced to Moses the last plague, the most terrible of all. At midnight the Lord would pass through Egypt, and every Egyptian firstborn would die, from Pharaoh's son who would sit on his throne to the son of the maidservant who was behind the mill, and every firstborn of the animals. There would be a great outcry throughout Egypt, such as there never was before and never would be again. But God has made provision for his people. He gave precise, detailed instructions that had to be followed exactly. Each Hebrew family was to choose a lamb. Not just any lamb, but lamb without blemish, perfect, a male of 1 year old. This lamb was to be examined for 4 days, living with the family, to make sure it was spotless. On the 14th day of the month, in the evening, when the sun began to set over Egypt, each family was to sacrifice its lamb. It was a solemn, sacred moment. The lamb, which had been cared for and watched, would now give its life. And then came the crucial part. The lamb's blood was to be collected in a basin and applied to the doorframes, the sides and top, using a sprig of hyssop. The blood should be visible from the outside, a clear, red sign, impossible to ignore. Inside the houses, families were to roast the lamb and eat it thoroughly, with unleavened bread and bitter herbs, dressed and ready to go, with sandals on their feet and staff in hand. It was a meal of liberation. And God made a solemn promise, "When I see the blood, I will pass over you." The night of Easter. As the sun set that night, a heavy atmosphere covered both Egypt and Goshen. The Hebrews moved in silence, obeying every detail of divine instructions. Parents held lambs that had been with their families for 4 days. Children petted the animals for the last time, without fully understanding what was happening. Then, at command, the lambs were sacrificed. Pure, innocent, spilled blood. With branches of hyssop, the men wet the blood and carefully rubbed it on the door frames. The red blood glistened in the light of the lamps running down the wood. It was an act of radical faith. There was no human logic in this, only obedience to God. "Why are we doing this, Dad?" the children asked. And the fathers answered, as God had instructed, "It is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the houses of the children of Israel in Egypt, when he smote the Egyptians and delivered our houses." Families gathered inside houses marked by blood. The doors were closed. No one should leave until dawn. The meal was served, the lamb roasted, the unleavened bread, the bitter herbs that reminded him of the suffering of slavery. Outside, the streets of Goshen were silent. Each door had a red light. Each family was protected under blood. But in Egypt, the houses did not have the blood. In the mansions of the rich and in the huts of the poor, in the houses of the priests and in the palaces, there was no sign of protection. Midnight arrived, and the angel of death passed through the earth. There was no noise, there was no warning. But in every Egyptian house without the blood, the firstborn simply stopped breathing. Pharaoh's eldest son, heir to the throne, died on his luxurious bed of linen and gold. The eldest son of the prisoner in the dark dungeon died in chains. Strong young men, small children, babies in their mother's arms, all the Egyptian firstborn died that night. The screams began. First one, then another, then hundreds, thousands. A collective outcry of unimaginable pain spread across Egypt. Mothers embraced lifeless bodies. Parents fell to their knees, incredulous. There was no house where there was not a dead person. Pharaoh himself woke up to find his son dead. The man who considered himself a god, who had power over millions, could not save his own son. He fell next to the body, and for the first time, his heart of stone broke. Their cries joined the chorus of lament that covered the nation. But in the blood-scarred houses inside Goshen, there was peace. The Hebrews heard the distant cries of the Egyptians, but inside their homes, their children slept safely. Healthy, protected, alive firstborns. The blood had made the difference. The blood on the doors was the barrier between death and life. It was not his kindness that saved them. It was not his works. It was the blood. Just the blood. It was still night when Pharaoh's messengers knocked on the doors of the Hebrew houses, calling for Moses and Aaron. The broken king sent a desperate message. "Arise, come out from among my people, both you and the children of Israel. Go, serve the Lord as you have said. Take your sheep and your cattle and go, and bless me also." The Egyptians, in their desperation and fear of more deaths, not only allowed the Hebrews to go, they begged them to go. They gave silver and gold jewelry, fine clothing, everything to hasten the departure of God's people. 600,000 men, not counting women and children, about 2 million people, prepared to leave. Entire families gathered in the streets. Animals were gathered in immense herds. Tents were rolled up. Belongings were loaded. And they began to walk. Generations that had been born into slavery now walked in freedom. Children who had never known any life other than forced labor now moved toward promise. Elders who thought they would die slaves now breathed free air. The streets of Goshen, which had once echoed with weeping and lamentation, now vibrated with songs of liberation. Mothers carried babies. Men led flocks. Young people helped the elderly. All the people moved as one body, united by the experience of the blood that saved them and by the hope of the promised land. When the sun rose that morning, the Hebrews were already far away. Behind them, they left Egypt in mourning, its fields destroyed, its economy ruined, its power broken. Ahead was the desert, the Red Sea, an encounter with God on Mount Sinai. But at that moment, as they walked under the open sky, one truth shone in every Hebrew heart. God had fulfilled his promise. He had heard their cries. He had seen her suffering. and he had redeemed them with a strong arm and mighty judgment. 400 years of slavery had ended in a single night, the night of blood, Easter night. The plagues of Egypt were not just demonstrations of power. Each plague was a direct judgment against the gods of Egypt. The Nile, worshipped as a deity, was transformed into death. The sun, considered supreme, was extinguished by darkness. The sacred animals died. The priests were powerless. The entire Egyptian pantheon was humbled before the one true God. But the last plague brought the most profound revelation. Salvation does not come by force. It does not come by human effort. It does not come by personal kindness. Salvation comes by blood. The Hebrew families were no better than the Egyptians. They were not morally superior. They did not deserve any more protection. The only difference between life and death that night was the blood on the doorframes. The angel of death did not ask about character, about good works, about religiosity. He sought only one thing: blood. Where there was blood, there was life. Where there was no blood, there was death. That lamb's blood, shed on the evening of the 14th day, marking the doors of the Hebrew houses, was a harbinger, a shadow of another lamb who would come centuries later. A lamb without blemish, who would be sacrificed so that his blood would mark not the wooden doors, but human hearts. A lamb whose death would bring not only deliverance from physical bondage, but redemption from the bondage of sin and death. Egypt learned in the most painful way possible that there is a God who sees, who hears, who acts, and who cannot be ignored. He learned that the oppression of the innocent does not go unnoticed. He learned that there are consequences to hardness of heart. And the people of Israel learned that their God is faithful, powerful, and that he keeps his promises. He learned that he distinguishes between his people and others. He learned that protection comes through obedience and blood. On that Passover night, under the blood of the Lamb, Israel was redeemed. And that redemption would echo through the centuries, reminding each generation that God delivers, God protects, and God saves. The blood made the difference then, and blood continues to make a difference to this day. Joseph of Egypt, from the well to the palace. More than 3,700 years ago, in the barren lands of Canaan, where the scorching sun cast long shadows over stony hills and dry valleys, one of the most extraordinary stories ever recorded unfolded. A story of betrayal and redemption, of suffering and glory, of a divine plan woven through the most unlikely human choices. This is the story of Joseph, son of Jacob, whose name would echo through the centuries as a testimony that even in the darkest moments, when all seems lost, there is a greater purpose being fulfilled. Part 1. The Young Dreamer. On the rolling plains of Hebron, among goatskin tents sewn with thick threads and supported by acacia wood stakes, Jacob lived with his large family. The patriarch owned vast flocks of sheep and goats that spread across the hills like white and brown clouds over the parched land. The smell of wood smoke mingled with the aroma of bread being baked on hot stones, while the sound of animal bleats constantly echoed through the camp. Among Jacob's 12 sons was a 17-year-old named Joseph. His dark eyes shone with intelligence, and his bearing was different from his rustic brothers, accustomed to hard work in the fields. Joseph was the son of Rachel, Jacob's beloved wife, who had died giving birth to his younger brother, Benjamin. Perhaps because of this, or perhaps because of the boy's unique personality, Jacob loved him in a special, evident, and even reckless way. One day, Jacob had a special tunic made for Joseph. It was not the simple, short garment that shepherds wore to work in the stony fields. It was a long ankle-length tunic woven from woolen threads dyed in vibrant colors: purple, crimson, sky blue, and gold. The sleeves were long, reaching to the wrists. It was a noble garment, a prince's garment, not a worker's. Each time Joseph walked through the camp wearing that tunic, it fluttered in the wind like a flag proclaiming his father's favoritism. Joseph's brothers saw that. Reuben, the firstborn, who should have the honor. Simeon and Levi, strong and impetuous. Judah, with a calculating look. And the others, all scorched by the desert sun, with calloused hands from hard work, watched Joseph in that colorful robe and felt hatred grow like weeds in their hearts. When Joseph approached, they turned their faces. When he spoke, they responded harshly. They could not even greet him with peace. But there was something more disturbing than the tunic. Joseph had dreams. One morning, after the family had eaten breakfast of bread, goat cheese, and dates, Joseph gathered his brothers under the thin shade of a wind-twisted tamarisk tree. His eyes shone with excitement as he told, "Listen to the dream I had. We were in the field, tying sheaves of wheat. Suddenly my bundle rose and stood upright, erect and firm. Then your sheaves drew near and bowed down before mine." The silence that followed was heavy as a stone. The brothers looked at each other, their faces hardening. Finally, one of them exploded. "Are you saying you're going to reign over us? That we will bow down to you?" The hatred that already existed has turned into something denser, more dangerous. But Joseph, in his youth, and perhaps naivety, had another dream. This time he dreamed that the sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed before him. When he told this dream, even Jacob rebuked him. "What is this dream? Are you saying that me, your mother, and your brothers will bow down to the ground before you?" But even as he rebuked, Jacob kept those words in his heart, pondering the meaning of those visions. The brothers, however, did not ponder. They were seething with envy and resentment. Every glance at Joseph was a spark that fed the fire of hatred. Part 2. The Betrayal and the Pit. Weeks passed. The pastures near Jacob's camp had been consumed by the flocks, and Joseph's brothers set out in search of new pastures. They traveled about 50 miles north to the fields of Shechem, taking with them hundreds of sheep and goats. Days later, in Jacob's tent, the patriarch called Joseph. "My son, your brothers are feeding the flocks in Shechem. I want you to go there, see how they are, how the herd is, and bring me news." Joseph put on his colorful tunic, put on his leather sandals, and set off. The journey was long. He crossed dry valleys where only thorny bushes grew among the rocks. He climbed hills from which he could see the vastness of the promised land, with its gnarled olive trees and solitary fig trees. The midday heat was stifling, and Joseph covered his head with a cloth to protect himself from the relentless sun. When he arrived in Shechem, he did not find his brothers. A man he met in the fields told him, "They have left here. I heard them saying that they were going to Dothan." Joseph continued his journey for another 20 kilometers until he saw in the distance the tents of his brothers set up near a well. From the top of a hill, under the scorching sun of the late afternoon, the brothers saw him coming. Even from a distance, the colorful tunic was unmistakable, shining like an open wound in the barren landscape. "Here comes the dreamer," said one, spitting out the words bitterly. Sitting in a circle on stones and worn carpets, they began to conspire. "Let's kill him," someone suggested. "Let us throw his body into one of these dry wells, and we will tell the father that a wild animal has devoured him. We will then see what will become of your dreams." But Reuben, the eldest, felt a weight on his conscience. "Don't shed blood," he said. "Throw it into that well over there, but don't get your hands on it." Secretly, Reuben planned to rescue him later and return him to his father. When Joseph finally arrived at the camp, smiling and greeting his brothers, he was greeted not with hugs but with violence. Rough hands grabbed him. Joseph cried out, confused and terrified, "What are you doing? I am your brother." But they didn't listen. They tore off her colorful tunic in anger, tearing her beautiful garment. Joseph fought, but there were many against one. They dragged him to the edge of an ancient well, long dry up. It was a cistern dug into the rock, about 10 feet deep, its rough walls covered with parched moss and loose stones. And they threw him in there. Joseph fell heavily to the bottom, his breath rushing out of his lungs on impact. He staggered to his feet, his hands scratched, his body sore. He looked up and saw the circle of light above, the faces of his brothers looking down expressionlessly. "Please," he shouted, his voice echoing off the damp walls of the cistern. "Why are they doing this? Get me out of here. Please." But they have moved away from the edge. Joseph heard their voices drifting away, heard laughter, heard the sound of something being prepared to eat. They simply sat down to have a meal, while Joseph's muffled cries came from the well like a distant wail. The hours passed. The afternoon gave way to dusk. Joseph, sitting at the cold, dark bottom of the well, wept. He cried for the betrayal, for the pain, for the fear. The stars began to appear in that distant circle above his head, the same stars that, in his dream, bowed before him. Now, he was at the bottom of a well, abandoned by those who were supposed to protect him. Part 3. sold into slavery. In the distance, the sound of rattles and the balloting of camels announced the arrival of a caravan. The brothers looked up and saw Ishmaelite merchants coming down the dusty road to Egypt. The camels swayed under the weight of their cargoes, aromatic resin, balsam, and myrrh, destined for Egyptian markets. Judah had an idea. What good is it for us to kill our brother and hide his blood? We will sell it to the Ishmaelites. So we will not lay our hands on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. The others agreed. After all, they would profit from the sale and still get rid of Joseph. They pulled Jose out of the well. He staggered up, blinking in the late afternoon light, his body covered in scratches and dust. For a moment, he believed that they had changed their minds, that they would set him free. But then he saw the merchants approaching, their faces burned by the desert sun, their clothes stained by the long journey. "No," Joseph cried out, understanding. "Don't do that. I am the son of Jacob. I am your brother." But iron chains were tied around his wrists. The Ishmaelites weighed 20 pieces of silver, the price of a young, healthy slave, and placed them in the greedy hands of the brothers. Joseph was pulled, struggling and screaming, tied to the camels. "Reuben, Judah, Simeon, please, do not abandon me." Their supplications were lost in the wind as the caravan departed, raising clouds of reddish dust. Joseph looked back, seeing his brothers get smaller and smaller on the horizon, until they disappeared completely. Ahead, a journey of hundreds of miles through the Sinai desert awaited him, toward the land of Egypt, toward the unknown, toward slavery. The brothers took Joseph's colorful tunic, killed a goat, and dipped the garment in his blood. They brought it to Jacob and said, "We have found this. See if it is your son's tunic or not." Jacob recognized the tunic immediately. His knees weakened. He tore his own garments, put sackcloth over his body, and wept bitterly. "It's my son's tunic. A wild animal has devoured him." Joseph was torn to pieces. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted, saying, "I will go down to the tomb mourning for my son." And Jacob wept for Joseph as one weeps for the dead. Part 4. In Egypt, Potiphar's house. After weeks of traveling under the scorching sun, the caravan finally arrived in Egypt. Joseph, exhausted and traumatized, was dragged through immense gates, entering a world completely different from anything he had ever known. Egypt was a land of wonders and contrasts. Gigantic columns rose skyward, covered with colorful hieroglyphics that told stories of gods and pharaohs. White, limestone palaces glistened in the sun. The Nile River, wide and majestic, cut through the land like a green strip in the middle of the golden desert. On its banks, fields of papyrus swayed in the wind, and peasants worked in irrigated fields where wheat, barley, and flax grew. Joseph was taken to the slave market. There, under canvas tents, men and women from different nations were displayed as commodities. The air smelled of sweat, fear, and spices. Buyers circulated, examining teeth, muscles, checking the health of each slave. It was then that Potiphar arrived. He was captain of Pharaoh's guard, a tall, imposing man dressed in impeccable white linen and fine leather sandals. A gold necklace hung on his chest, a symbol of his elevated position. His experienced eyes examined Joseph. He saw a strong, healthy young man with intelligent eyes despite his visible despair. Potiphar bought Joseph and took him to his house. Potiphar's residence was magnificent. Located in a prime area of the city, it was built around a central courtyard with a rectangular pool surrounded by painted columns. Lush gardens grew there with palm trees, sycamore trees, and fragrant flowers. Cool rooms with polished stone floors overlooked the courtyard. The walls were decorated with paintings of scenes of the Nile, birds, and colorful fish. Joseph began as the lowest of the servants. His hands, used to tending sheep, now carried water, cleaned floors, waited tables. But something about Joseph was different. Even in slavery, even in the pain of having been betrayed and sold, Joseph did not give in to bitterness. He worked with excellence, with honesty, with an integrity that drew attention. And God was with him. Everything Joseph did prospered. The tasks entrusted to him were fulfilled perfectly. He quickly learned the Egyptian language, the customs, the laws. Potiphar began to notice that young Hebrew was no ordinary slave. There was wisdom in his counsels, efficiency in his administration. Gradually, Jose was given greater responsibilities. From being a servant of basic tasks, he was promoted to supervisor of the other slaves. Later, he became administrator of Potiphar's goods. Finally, Potiphar entrusted Joseph with everything he owned. The house prospered under Jose's management. Business multiplied. The barns were always full. Potiphar didn't have to worry about anything except choosing what he would eat. Everything else was in Joseph's competent hands. Part 5. The False Accusation. But Jose's success attracted another attention. Potiphar's wife was an Egyptian woman of great beauty. Her eyes were outlined with black coal, her shiny black hair framing her face. She wore gold and silver jewelry and dresses of fine linen that revealed her forms. Accustomed to having everything she wanted, she began to fix her eyes on Joseph. Joseph was young, strong, and personable. There was a dignity in him that set him apart. Day after day, as Joseph ran the house, she watched him. And then she began to seduce him. "Lie with me," she would say, her words anointed with perfume and promises. Joseph refused. "My Lord has trusted me with everything in this house," he replied, looking away respectfully. "He has not withheld anything from me except you, because it is your wife. How could I commit such wickedness and sin against God?" But she didn't give up. Day after day, he insisted. Joseph avoided being alone with her, deviated from her paths, kept his distance. The constant rejection turned her desire into obsession, and her obsession into anger. One day, the house was empty. The servants had left, there was a party in the city, and Joseph had to get some documents in one of the inner rooms. She was waiting for him there. When Joseph entered, she seized him by the cloak. "Lie down with me," he demanded, his nails digging into the fabric. Joseph retreated violently, but she held on tight. He let go abruptly, leaving the cloak in his hands, and fled the house, running towards the courtyard. Humiliated, enraged by rejection, she held the cloak in her hands, trembling with anger. And he planned his revenge. When the servants returned, she cried out, "Look, that Hebrew that my husband brought came in here to dishonor me." But when I screamed for help, he ran away, leaving the cloak with me. When Potiphar came home at night, tired from his day serving Pharaoh, his wife ran to him with tears in her eyes, holding Joseph's cloak. "That Hebrew slave you trust so much tried to rape me. He just couldn't because I screamed." Fury took hold of Potiphar. He asked no questions. He did not hear defenses. Joseph was immediately dragged to prison, not an ordinary prison, but the king's prison, where Pharaoh's own prisoners were kept. And so the righteous man, the faithful servant who had refused to sin, was cast into a dungeon. Part 6. In prison. Prison was a dark place. Built with huge blocks of stone, it had small windows near the ceiling through which light barely entered. The smell of humidity, mold, and huddled humanity permeated the air. Prisoners groaned in dark cells. Chains clinked. Guards passed by with torches, their shadows dancing on the damp walls. Joseph was thrown into a cell. He sat on the cold stone floor, his back against the rough wall. For the second time in his life, he was at the bottom of a well, this time a well made of stone, iron, and injustice. He could have given in to despair. He could have cursed God, questioning why a faithful man would suffer such trials. Betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, unjustly imprisoned. But Joseph did not curse, and God did not abandon him. The chief jailer, a man hardened by years of running that gloomy prison, began to notice something in Joseph. There was honesty in his eyes, peace in his countenance, even in that place of despair, wisdom in his words. Gradually, as had been the case in Potiphar's home, Joseph was given responsibilities. First small tasks, then the supervision of other prisoners. Finally, the jailer entrusted Joseph with the administration of the entire prison. Everything prospered under his hands, and the jailer did not have to worry about anything. One day, 2 new prisoners arrived, important men who had offended Pharaoh. One was the chief butler, responsible for serving wine to the king and making sure it wasn't poisoned. The other was the head baker, who prepared bread for the royal table. They had been accused of some offense against Pharaoh and thrown into that prison while their cases were investigated. Joseph was appointed to serve them. One morning, Joseph entered their cell and noticed that they both had troubled expressions, faces heavy with concern. "Why do you look so sad today?" he asked. "We have had dreams," they replied, "and there is no one to interpret them." Joseph replied humbly, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." The cupbearer first recounted, "In my dream there was a vine with 3 branches. It sprouted, blossomed, and its clusters produced ripe grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. I took the grapes, squeezed them into the cup, and put it into Pharaoh's hand." Joseph answered, "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will take him out of here and restore him to his charge. You will put the cup in Pharaoh's hand again, as you used to." The cupbearer's face lit up with hope. Joseph continued, "But when all is well with you, remember me. Mention me to Pharaoh and bring me out of this prison. I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews, and here, too, I did nothing to deserve to be thrown into this dungeon." The baker, seeing that the interpretation had been favorable, also told his dream. "I had 3 baskets of white bread on my head. In the upper basket were all kinds of roasts for Pharaoh, but the birds ate them." Jose became serious. His voice was gentle but clear. "The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days Pharaoh will take you out of here, hang you on a tree, and the birds will eat your flesh." 3 days later, it was Pharaoh's birthday. There was a great celebration in the palace. And it happened just as Joseph had prophesied. The cupbearer was restored to his office, again serving the cup of wine to the king. The baker was executed, but the cupbearer, absorbed again by the pleasures and responsibilities of the court, completely forgot Joseph. And Joseph remained in prison. 2 years passed, 730 days. Joseph remained faithful, working, serving, waiting. Not in a passive waiting of despair, but in an active waiting of faith. Because Joseph had learned something profound through his trials. God had a plan. And when God has a plan, no betrayal, no lie, no imprisonment can stop him. Part 7. Pharaoh's Dreams. Pharaoh's palace stood majestically on the banks of the Nile. Its colossal columns supported ceilings painted with golden stars on a blue background. Immense courtyards were guarded by statues of sphinxes and Egyptian gods. Sumptuous gardens surrounded lotus pools where colorful fish swam among the roots of aquatic plants. In his private quarters, decorated with gold and lapis lazuli, Pharaoh slept on a bed covered with fine linen. But that night, his sleep was disturbed by dreams. In the first dream, he was on the banks of the Nile. Suddenly, 7 fat, lustrous, healthy cows came up from the river and grazed among the green reeds. Soon after, 7 other cows, thin, ugly, bony, like he had never seen in Egypt, also came up from a river. And the lean cows devoured the fat cows. But even after eating them, they were still as thin as before. Pharaoh woke up startled, his heart pounding. He calmed down, drank water, went back to sleep. And he dreamed again. This time he saw 7 ears of wheat growing on a single stalk, full, healthy, golden ears. Then 7 withered ears of corn, scorched by the east wind, sprouted after them. And the withered ears swallowed up the full ears. Pharaoh woke up again. The dawn began to brighten the sky through the linen curtains. But anguish weighed heavily on his chest. He knew, he felt, that those dreams had meaning. In the morning he sent for all the wise men and wizards of Egypt. They came with their ceremonial robes, their amulets and scrolls. Pharaoh told the dreams. The magicians consulted their tablets, made their incantations, deliberated among themselves. But none could interpret them satisfactorily. It was then that the chief butler, serving wine to Pharaoh, had a sudden awakening of memory. "Today I remember my faults," he exclaimed. And he told about the time he spent in prison, about the young Hebrew who had correctly interpreted his and the baker's dreams. "Bring this man to me at once," commanded Pharaoh. Part 8. Before the king. Messengers rushed to the prison. Joseph was in his cell, wearing the simple, worn-out clothes of a prisoner. Guards hurriedly took him out to bathe, shaved his grown beard, gave him clean clothes. It all happened so quickly that Jose barely had time to process what was happening. And then he found himself being led through the immense corridors of the palace, past columns that stood like stone trees, his bare feet stepping on polished alabaster floors. Guards with spears and shields lined his path. Courtiers in luxurious robes watched him curiously. Finally, he was introduced into the throne room. It was an impressive sight. The high ceiling was supported by rows of columns decorated with scenes from Pharaoh's life and conquests. Incense burned in golden braziers, filling the air with the fragrance of myrrh and cinnamon. Court officials, dressed in impeccable white linen and gold jewelry, lined up on both sides. And on the throne, lifted up on a platform, was Pharaoh. He wore the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, white and red. A scepter was in one hand, the flail in the other, symbols of his absolute power. His solid gold necklace gleamed against his bare chest, tanned by the sun. His eyes, outlined with kohl, were fixed on Joseph with intensity. Jose prostrated himself to the ground, as protocol required. "Get up," Pharaoh said. His voice echoed through the large room. "I had a dream, and no one can interpret it. But I have heard that when you hear a dream, you can interpret it." Joseph stood up. There he was, facing the most powerful man in the known world. A prisoner, a slave, a foreigner. But Joseph did not seek credit for himself. Instead, he replied with humility that disarmed everyone present. "It's not in me, but God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace." Pharaoh then narrated his dreams in detail. The 7 fat cows devoured by the thin ones. The 7 full ears of grain consumed by the withered ones. The entire court was silent, waiting. Jose took a deep breath. It was not his wisdom, but divine revelation. And then he spoke with clarity and authority. Pharaoh's 2 dreams are one. God revealed to Pharaoh what is about to happen. The 7 fat cows and the 7 full ears represent 7 years. The lean cows and the withered ears also represent 7 years. 7 years of great abundance will come in all the land of Egypt. Then will come 7 years of severe famine. Abundance will be forgotten on earth because of the famine that will follow, for it will be extremely severe. The dream has been doubled because the issue is firmly decided by God, and he will do so soon. The hall remained in absolute silence. Everyone processed the words. 7 years of plenty. 7 years of hunger. It was a frightening revelation, but it had the weight of truth. Joseph continued, now not only interpreting, but advising. "Let Pharaoh seek out a man of discernment and wisdom, and place him over the land of Egypt. Appoint officers on the land to collect 1/5 of the entire harvest during the 7 years of plenty. This food will be stored up as a reserve for the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the land will not be devastated by famine." Pharaoh looked at Joseph for a long moment. Then he consulted his counselors with his eyes. Finally, he turned to the entire court and declared, "Could we find someone like this, in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Since God has revealed all these things to you, there is no one so judicious and wise as you. You will be over my house, and all my people will submit to your commands. Only on the throne will I be greater than you." Part 9. From Prisoner to Governor. What happened next was like a dream within reality. Pharaoh took from his own finger the ring with the royal seal, an object of immense power, as it authorized decrees and documents in the name of the king himself, and placed it on Joseph's finger. He had him dressed in garments of the finest linen, white as a cloud, woven with a perfection that only the Egyptians knew how to achieve. They placed around his neck a necklace of solid gold, heavy and magnificent. Pharaoh proclaimed, "His name shall be Zaphenath-Paneah," which meant God speaks and he lives in Egyptian. And he gave him to wife Asenath, the daughter of Potipharah, the priest of On, one of the noblest families of Egypt. Joseph was placed in the 2nd chariot of the kingdom. As he was carried through the streets of the capital, heralds rushed ahead shouting, "Make way! Pay homage!" The people knelt as they watched this young man, who a few hours ago was a prisoner, pass by, now dressed as a prince, with authority over all the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old. 13 years had passed, 13 long years, between slavery and imprisonment. 13 years of trial, of learning, of character building. And now, in a single day, God had raised him from the dungeon to the throne. Jose wasted no time. He traveled throughout Egypt, organizing the collection and storage of grain. During the 7 years of plenty, the harvests were so plentiful that Joseph had immense barns built in all the cities. Wheat was stored in such vast quantities that they stopped measuring. It was like sea sand without measure. Joseph also had 2 children with Asenath. The first he called Manasseh, which means God made me forget all my suffering and all my father's house. The second he called Ephraim, which means God made me bear fruit in the land of my affliction. Then, just as Joseph had prophesied, the 7 years of plenty ended, and hunger came. Part 10, the reunion. The famine did not only hit Egypt. It spread throughout the region, Canaan, Arabia, Syria. The fields dried up. Crops failed. The cattle died. People began to starve. But in Egypt, thanks to Joseph's foresight and planning, there was food in abundance in the royal granaries. People from all nations came to buy wheat. In Canaan, at the tent of Jacob, now a white-haired elder, the situation was desperate. But he heard that there was wheat in Egypt. He called his 10 eldest sons together. He kept Benjamin at home, for fear of losing his youngest son as well, and said, "Go down to Egypt and buy food for us, that we may live and not die." The journey was long and difficult. When they finally arrived in the Egyptian capital, they were directed to the palace, as all grain sales were supervised by the governor himself. The brothers entered the courtroom. Joseph was seated on a raised platform, dressed as an Egyptian prince. His head was shaved in the Egyptian style. Her eyes were outlined with makeup. He spoke Egyptian through an interpreter. As the brothers approached, they fell on their faces on the ground before him, just as Joseph had dreamed of more than 20 years ago. Joseph recognized them immediately. His heart leapt in his chest. There they were, Reuben, Simeon, Judah, all older, aged by time and work, but undoubtedly his brothers. Those who had hated him, sold him, lied about his death. But they didn't recognize him. How could they? They expected Joseph, if still alive, to be a slave in some forgotten corner. They would never have imagined that this Egyptian nobleman, speaking in a foreign tongue and dressed in all the pomp of power, was the brother they had sold. Joseph decided to test them. He spoke harshly through the interpreter. "Where do you come from?" "From a land of Canaan, my lord," they answered, still prostrate. "We came to buy food." "You are spies," accused Jose. "They came to see the unprotected parts of our land." "No, my lord," they protested, terrified. "His servants came only to buy food. We are 12 brothers, children of one man in the land of Canaan. The youngest is with our father, and it no longer exists." Upon hearing about Benjamin and his father still alive, Joseph had to control himself not to reveal his identity right there. But the test continued. He had them arrested for 3 days. Then he said that only one would be imprisoned, Simeon, while the others returned with food, but they should bring their younger brother to prove that they were not spies. As they argued among themselves in Hebrew, thinking that Joseph did not understand, they said, "Surely we are guilty of what we did to our brother. We saw his anguish when he begged us, but we did not hear him. That is why this affliction has come upon us." Reuben answered, "Have I not told you not to sin against the child? But they didn't listen to me. Now we are called to account for his blood." Joseph had to turn and leave, as tears filled his eyes, and he could no longer contain himself. After he had regained his composure, he returned and had their sacks filled with wheat, and secretly returned their money by putting it into the sacks. They returned to Canaan and told Jacob all that had happened. When they discovered the money in the bags, everyone trembled with fear. Jacob lamented, "You leave me childless. Joseph is no more, Simeon is not here, and now they want to take Benjamin." But the hunger continued. Finally, there was no choice. Jacob, with a heavy heart, allowed Benjamin to go. When they returned to Egypt, this time with Benjamin, Joseph prepared a banquet in his home. The brothers were confused and frightened. Why did the governor of Egypt treat them with such honor? During the feast, Joseph asked about their father. "Does he still live?" "Okay. Yes, our father is still alive and well," they replied, bowing respectfully. Joseph looked at Benjamin, his blood brother, son of the same mother, now a grown man. His emotions almost overwhelmed him. "God be gracious to you, my son," he said, and had to leave the hall quickly because he was crying uncontrollably. Joseph tested them once more. He had his sacks filled with food, returned the money again, and put his silver cup in Benjamin's sack. When they left the next morning, Joseph sent his guards to pursue them and charge them with theft. When the cup was found in Benjamin's sack, the brothers tore their garments in despair. They were brought back. Judah, the same one who had suggested selling Joseph, fell at the governor's feet and made an impassioned supplication. He told of his elderly father, who loved Benjamin above all else, of how he had already lost a son, of how he would die if he lost him too. And he offered, "Let me be a slave in the boy's place, but let the boy go back with his brothers." It was the moment Jose had been waiting for. His brothers had changed. Those men who sold one brother were now willing to sacrifice everything for the other. Part 11, the revelation. Jose could no longer contain himself. "Get everyone out of here," he ordered in Egyptian. All the attendants, guards, and servants quickly left, leaving Joseph alone with his brothers. And then Joseph wept. He wept so loudly that even the Egyptians outside the room could hear. In Hebrew, the language of his childhood, the language he had not spoken in years, Joseph said, "I am Joseph." The brothers were speechless with terror. "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt." The silence was deafening. The brothers retreated, pale, trembling. Here was the man they had betrayed, now with absolute power over their lives. Surely he would take revenge. But Joseph approached them, tears running down his face. "Come closer to me, please," he said gently. As they approached hesitantly, Joseph continued, "I am Joseph, your brother. But now do not grieve or be angry with yourselves for having sold me here. It was to preserve lives that God sent me before you. There have already been 2 years of famine in the land, and there will still be 5 years without planting or harvesting. God has sent me before you to preserve a remnant on earth and save your lives by a great deliverance. Therefore it was not you who sent me here, but God." And then Joseph embraced Benjamin and wept over him. He embraced each of his brothers. And they wept together, tears of repentance, tears of forgiveness, tears of reconciliation. Joseph said, "Hurry up. Return to my father and say to him, 'This is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord over all Egypt. Come down here without delay. You will dwell in the land of Goshen near me, you, your sons' sons, your flocks, and all that you have. There I will sustain you through the 5 years of famine that are yet to come, so that you will not be impoverished, neither you nor your house, nor all that you have.'" Pharaoh, when he heard that Joseph's brothers had arrived, rejoiced. "Tell your brothers," Pharaoh commanded Joseph, "to bring your father and your families. I will give them the best of the land of Egypt, and they will eat of the bounty of the land." And so Jacob, the old patriarch who mourned his son for dead, received the most extraordinary news. Joseph is still alive. He is ruler over all the land of Egypt. At first, his heart failed because he could not believe it. But when they saw the chariots that Joseph had sent to fetch him, Jacob's spirit revived. "Enough. My son Jose is still alive. I'll go see him before I die." The journey has been made. 70 people of Jacob's family went down to Egypt. When Joseph heard that his father was approaching, he prepared his chariot and went to meet him in the region of Goshen. When they saw each other, Joseph threw himself into his father's arms and wept on his neck for a long time. Jacob said to Joseph, "Now I may die, since I have seen your face and know that you are still alive." Joseph settled his family in the best lands of Egypt. During the years of famine, he supported not only his entire family, but also the surrounding nations. Thousands of lives were saved because of the obedience, integrity, and wisdom of this young man who refused to be bitter, who remained faithful even when all seemed lost. Years later, as Jacob was dying, he blessed Joseph, saying, "The God who has shepherded me all my life until this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless these young men." And he prophesied great things about Joseph's sons. Even after Jacob died, the brothers still feared that Joseph would take revenge. But Joseph said to them with tears, "Do not be afraid. Am I in God's place? You planned evil against me, but God made it good to accomplish what we see today, that is, to keep many people alive. Now fear not, I will uphold you and your children." And he comforted them, speaking to their hearts. Joseph lived 110 years. He saw his children and his children's children. Before he died, he said to his brothers, "God will certainly visit you and bring you up from this land to the land that he swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Final reflection. Joseph's story teaches us profound truths that echo through the millennia. It teaches that human betrayal cannot thwart the divine purpose, that the deepest well may be the path to the highest palace, that faithfulness in dark times prepares character for times of glory. Joseph could have become bitter when he was betrayed by his brothers. He could have given up when he was sold into slavery. He could have lost faith when he was falsely accused and imprisoned. He could have taken revenge when he had power over those who hurt him. But at every crossroads, Joseph chose faithfulness. He chose integrity. He chose to trust that God had a greater plan, even when that plan passed through dark valleys. And in the end, Joseph was able to say with truth, "You planned evil against me, but God made it good." Because when God has a plan, no well is too deep. No betrayal is too strong. No false accusation is too powerful. No prison is too long. And no dream given by God will fail to be fulfilled. From the well to the palace. From prison to the throne. From the blood-stained tunic to the governor's robes. This is the story of Joseph. And it is an eternal testimony that God writes straight through crooked lines and transforms the greatest tragedies into the greatest triumphs.